Lingua Latina per se illustrata capitulum quartum Dominus et servi Studia Romana. The Roman familia consists of the master, dominus, his wife, domina, their children, liberi, and their slaves, servi and ancillae. The familia had a shared religious cult or religious tradition called the lar familiaris, or plural, lares familiares, whose shrine was called a lararium and was located usually in the atrium of the house, but sometimes also found in the kitchen or the peristyle, which is an inner courtyard lined with rows of columns. Lares are depicted as male dancers, mid-dance, as can be seen from their billowing tunics, carrying a drinking horn or a bowl. They often flank an image of a man with his toga over his head, the garb of someone acting in a priestly function and preparing to perform a sacrifice. This image represents the genius, spirit, or of the dominus of the home. There is also often a snake depicted below the lares and the dominus. The lares belonged to and protected the place, and thus united all who lived in that place. In addition to the lares for the homestead, the lares familiares, there were also lares for the crossroads in the neighborhood, the gods of the crossroads honored at the festival of the Compitalia, and also of the town in general, lares publici, that is, of nearly every place that was marked as a special location, such as the home, the crossroads, etc. The other important domestic gods were Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, and the Penates. The Penates were also guardians of the household, with dominion over the household goods, including food. Unlike the lares, they were associated with the paterfamilias, instead of with the whole familia. Slavery was an accepted fact of life in the ancient world. As Rome expanded from a series of huts on the Palatine Hill to a massive empire through warfare, prisoners of war became slaves. The children of those slaves, called vernae, increased the number. The master had complete control over his slaves' lives. Marriage between slaves was not recognized under Roman law, but they could be given permission to enter into a contubernium. Their children belonged to the master and were called vernae, which are homebred slaves, as opposed to slaves bought in the slave market. When a master manumitted, sent from his land, or in other words, freed a slave, that slave became a freedman, or libertus, or if it were a female, liberta. Although no longer part of the familia, the libertus now belongs among his former master's dependents or clients, Latin clientes, and still has obligations to his former master. A slave could earn a small amount of money, a peculium, for his services. He might eventually save enough money to buy his freedom. The slaves in our story have names that suggest their origin. Syra might have come from Asia Minor, Syria, and the land around Assyria. Varro, 1st century BC polymath in De Lingua Latina, tells us that masters often choose the names of their new slaves either from the name of the person who sold the slave or the region in which the slave was purchased. Or he might give the new slave whatever name appealed to him. Delia is a Greek name. Was she bought at Delos, a center of the slave trade? Who knows? As is Davus, whose name was popular in Roman comedy. In capitulum sextum decimum, you will learn that medus is also Greek. There were different types of slaves, by the way. The slaves in our story are house slaves. Does that remind you of something from Harry Potter, possibly? But Julius owns other slaves, too, who worked in the fields and the mines. There were highly educated slaves who could teach children and their masters and act as secretaries and scribes. There were also chefs who were highly prized and very expensive. One of Aemilia's ancillae would have acted as her hairdresser, ornatrix. There were pedisequi and pedisequae, In other words, slaves who were in constant attendance on their masters. The name means someone who follows one's footsteps. A Roman involved in public affairs would have walked through the forum with his nomenclator, a slave whose job it was to tell his master the names of those they encountered in Rome.